You can't just let your tree fall on my house! This is completely unacceptable behavior!
It started with a tree. A massive oak that had stood for more than a century, its roots sunk deep into the soil, its branches stretching across the sky like the arms of a giant. The tree was older than the neighborhood, older than the HOA, older than almost everything around it. My family had cared for it for generations, trimming it carefully, keeping it healthy, and building our farm and our lives around its steady presence. The tree wasn't just a landmark. It provided shade for my cattle in summer, shelter for owls and hawks, and beauty that drew people to stop and take pictures. The land belonged to me, and the tree stood firmly on my side of the property line, but its branches did what branches do. They grew outward. Some hung over the fence, stretching across into the HOA's pristine subdivision. That had never been a problem until their president, an entitled woman who had turned the HOA into a personal throne, decided she had had enough of it. She complained that the branches shed too many leaves. She claimed the roots would one day damage sidewalks. She even went as far as saying the tree ruined the aesthetic of the subdivision's perfect little lawns. I reminded her politely that the tree was mine, protected both by ownership and by county preservation laws. Cutting it down wasn't an option. She didn't like that answer. One morning, without notice, I heard the whine of chainsaws. By the time I sprinted across the field, it was too late. She had hired a crew, waved them onto my land, and ordered them to cut the oak down to the stump. They left a mountain of splintered wood where a living monument had stood for generations. My cattle were restless, the owls gone, the shade stripped away. My heart sank, but my blood boiled. It was a violation not just of property, but of history. I reported it immediately. Trespassing, destruction of property, violation of preservation laws. It was all on record. The sheriff documented the scene. Neighbors whispered about her arrogance, but Karen herself brushed it off. She strutted around the neighborhood, proud of her victory, boasting that she'd rid them of an eyesore. For a while, she seemed untouchable. But arrogance is a way of writing its own downfall. That oak hadn't just stood tall, its roots had long held the soil firm along the slope between my farm and her property. With the tree gone, the first heavy storm rolled in and did what nature always does when balance is broken. The rain poured down, saturating the ground until it loosened, and the hillside began to shift. Without the oak's roots to hold it, the soil gave way. It started small, a trickle of mud sliding into her backyard. Then came the cracking sound, loud enough for the whole street to hear. By the time the storm finished, a massive portion of the slope had collapsed. Fences snapped, patios broke, and her pristine house sat tilted on a cracked foundation, one corner sinking into the mess of mud and debris. The tree she had hated so much was gone, but the destruction left in its absence was worse than she could have imagined. Instead of accepting responsibility, she did what entitled people always do. She looked for someone else to blame. Within a week, I was served papers. She was suing me for damages, claiming my tree had caused a disaster. Her argument was as twisted as a root she had destroyed. Because the oak had been on my land, I was responsible for everything that followed its fall. She wanted hundreds of thousands of dollars, enough to repair her house, her yard, and her pride. But she didn't count on the evidence. I had the sheriff report showing she'd ordered the tree cut down. I had receipts from the crew she had hired, complete with her signature. I had photos of the oak healthy and strong just days before. And, most importantly, I had county preservation law on my side, a statute that made what she did not just reckless, but illegal. The courtroom became the place where her arrogance finally unraveled. The judge listened to her complaints about leaves and shade, about appearances and inconveniences, and then compared them to the facts: trespass, unlawful removal, destruction of property, and reckless disregard for the natural consequences. The case didn't take long to collapse. Hayes, not mine. Not only was a lawsuit thrown out, but the court turned the tables. She was found liable for damages to my land, fines for violating preservation laws, and restitution for the loss of the tree. She had cut it down without permission, against the law, and in the process, had doomed her own house. The irony was so sharp it cut deeper than any chainsaw. The neighborhood, once hesitant to cross her, saw her for what she was, The president who fined people for having mailboxes an inch too high or grass a shade too long had destroyed a landmark and nearly destroyed herself in the process. Her authority withered the same way the oak had fallen, but unlike the tree, her downfall was something the community welcomed. For me, the loss of the oak was still painful. No judgment could replace 150 years of growth. But there was a measure of justice in knowing that arrogance had consequences. The land remembers what people forget. Roots hold more than soil. They hold balance. When someone cuts them down for selfish reasons, the collapse is inevitable. Karen learned that too late. She thought cutting down the tree would make her more powerful, more in control of her perfect subdivision. Instead, it left her with a ruined house, a mountain of debt, and a reputation in ashes. For years she had ruled her HOA with fines and threats, but in the end, the only person she managed to bring down was herself. The stump of the oak remains as a marker, a reminder of what stood there and what arrogance destroyed. I planted new trees nearby, saplings that one day might stretch into the sky the way their predecessor had. They'll take decades to reach the same height, but time is something the land has plenty of. Unlike her house, unlike her pride, the farm endures. And that's the story of how HOA Karen cut down a 150-year-old tree on my land, only to watch her own home crumble and her lawsuit blow up in her face. Do subscribe for more.